This week, we sat down with Ryan Holiday. And I think what made the conversation so interesting is that with AI, we're sort of living through something completely new. Or maybe we're not. Ryan kept coming back to the idea that humans have gone through change before, and that Stoicism has a lot to say about how we respond to uncertainty. The full episode is live now. I hope you enjoy it.
I'm Ryan Holiday. I'm an author. I live here outside Austin, Texas. I write about ancient philosophy and what it can teach us about modern life. And in this moment of change and disruption, I actually think that the Stoics have quite a lot to teach us about AI and the skills required to sort of thrive in this new world.
Professor Werdelin, what are your big takeaways from Ryan Holiday, Modern Stoic?
I'm so fascinated by the topic, and so was excited to talk to him. The thing that I got to think about is when he was talking about how there's been changes before. Everything inside me was like, yeah, but not this. And then I talked to my
Mm.
dad the other day, who's 87, and he was telling me about growing up here in Europe under the Second World War. And he goes, life was pretty changed, like a lot of changes there. And so I guess the maybe not necessarily like takeaway in how to use AI. I think for me the big takeaway was like this is going to be a big change, but there's been big changes before. And I think the second thing he said is that we can either sit and kind of like skulk about it, or we can try to figure out how do we do something positive. And I'm reminded when I did work trying to get entrepreneurship into organizations, I often would say, well, if you want to see yourself as an entrepreneurial person, one of your jobs is to take anxiety on your shoulder for other people. And so when they ask you, are
Mm.
you sure that this is going to happen? You have to say, I'm absolutely 100% sure. Even though in your hearts of hearts, you're like, oh, there's a lot of things that can go wrong here. And so
No,
I
wait,
do,
I'm sure about what? What was your dad's advice? I'm
whatever it
sure
is,
about
I mean,
what?
like entrepreneurship is always about thinking about a potential future that hasn't happened yet and then basically articulating to other people, right? Like that's often what entrepreneurs do. And so we are kind of like the imposters that go around and impostering all the time, right? But I think it's part of it is our job to say, give people comfort in saying there is a potential path. And while it's not crystal clear that we should walk it, let's try to walk it. And I think it's a little bit the same thing with AI. Yes, there can be many ways that AI could be used. And yes, there are things that could happen that is not ideal for society. And I think we can all worry about that, and we do. But there are also a lot of positive path we can do. And so we have the choice right now to say, do I think and do I want to try to come up and use AI for something good? Or do I want to just sit and be very worried about all these bad things happening? And I think that is an individual choice that people will have to make. And so I think the big thing I took away is that that is a moment you can take every second, every day, right?
Mm. Mm.
And I
Mm.
guess I'm choosing to do the latter.
Well said. Well said. I think the point about change, it's interesting that your remark is, well, but what about this moment? Like this moment does feel particular. And I think there is a sense in which that's true, right? That this is a different kind of a change. However, every kind of change before was relative to the changes that came before a different kind of change. And I find it somewhat uplifting and heartening, the opposite of disheartening. Can you be heartened? I don't know. But the opposite of disheartening, it's somewhat heartening to realize humans have been dealing with this. The future is unknown and uncertain, and there's great upheaval and uncertainty, right? For example, I take the realm of politics. If you think that we're polarized now, and there is data that suggests we're more polarized than ever, yet when you look at newspaper clippings, even going back to the 1800s, 1700s, whatever, there's vitriol there. And it's the most important election in the history of the nation then, right? It's almost like every election is most important because it's the only one that's unknown. And we tend to put excessive valence on this particular unknown. Like, you aren't concerned at all about the deal that you even not forget the deal you won last year. The deal you lost, you probably don't spend any time thinking about. Why?
Mm,
Because like everything worked out, right?
yeah.
But this deal now that's unknown, there's this anxiety, right? So to me, that was it was a little bit of a heartening message. I think that humans have actually been grappling with the question of and the uncertainty of change for quite some time. And to know that there are traditions that have been developed to help humans grapple with that, I think is as I mentioned at the top, somebody replied to my newsletter saying, the Stoics have been grappling with these questions for a couple thousand years. And that's actually what kind of got us in touch with Ryan. To me, when I got that reply, it was a realization, oh, wait, there are tools for this. Because right now, what's being hyped in the media and everything is, this is unprecedented. There's nothing like it. There's something reassuring about the reminder, oh no, actually people have always been feeling that way
Yeah.
and they've gotten
Yeah.
through it. I find that uplifting.
And also sometimes, I mean, I'm definitely somebody who defaults to worry. So, like the concerns about AI is not lost on me. But
Mm.
then you start to look at some of the stats of different things, right? You look at when ATM was introduced and everybody was worried about the people that work in banks, or when McDonald's introduced their self-serve kiosk. And then you read that basically both of those industries hired more people instead of less
Mhm.
afterwards, right?
Mhm.
Or
Same with radiologists now, right?
so I think there is like this tendency to worry. And I do think if we look at that, I have another person the other day who made the argument that the market, like the financial market, which is like this very, very intelligent machine where everybody pours a ton of money in to basically predict how the future is.
Right.
And it thinks it's going to be better than it used to be, right?
Huh.
And so there's all these data points that we get that things are probably going to be fine. And then but then you still kind of like worry about it. I guess his point was that it doesn't really matter. We are here today. The weather tomorrow is going to change, but make sure to look at and check out the sun.
What I haven't studied stoicism much myself. And so I don't know some of these things, but I don't know how we could push the conversation. One thing I find myself wishing for is some more kind of practical, like tangible, like for example, I think one stoic practice is kind of a daily reflection.
Mm.
I think that's probably a great idea for all of us, right? I
Yeah.
think another stoic practice is something about kind of contemplating your own mortality, recognizing you are going, like the only thing that is certain in your life is that it will end,
Yeah.
and yet that's probably, we treat, as they say, right? We treat death as if it's uncertain and life as if it's certain, whereas the opposite is true. Life is uncertain and death is certain. So to me, if nothing else, I want to pay Ryan the compliment that he has created in me a suction for, I'm curious to go and see what did the Stoics have to say about this stuff, because we didn't get into too many technical details. One thing I did wanted to mention that one thing I did want to mention, actually, now that I say it again, it does make sense. Both work. One thing that I want to mention, maybe let's just leave it. Let's just see what happens. Drop in the comments, Jeremy Zadoofus, the Kissinger anecdote. That was worth the price of admission for me. I mean, and Ryan actually, Ryan will read entire books. I know this because I've read that he does this. He'll read entire books for a single anecdote. So, and he'll read an 800-page book. So I was sitting in a 1-hour conversation. The Kissinger anecdote is worth the price of admission alone for me. I mean, that is such an exceptional practice for AI,
Yeah.
whether he knew it or not. And I would say I don't implement it nearly enough, but if you want the playbook here, if you want to write and maybe just have your AI take dictation for a second, whatever the AI says, say, this is wrong, do better, without reading its response. And then when it comes back, say, this is wrong, do better. And then when it comes back, say, now I'm going to read it for the first time.
That's funny.
And that to me, it's not, I mean, it is funny, but it's so true.
Yeah.
It's so true. And
Do you think
insofar as
technically if you say to an agent, this is wrong, do better, that it would be so ready to please you that it might actually go the wrong way because you're wrong it?
maybe what I would say is not this is wrong, because I agree it might go the opposite direction, which could be interesting. But what I would say is it feels like you didn't exert sufficient effort and thoughtfulness to do an exceptional job here.
Do better.
I think you can do better. Or even I've heard actually a lot of people in our friend group say things like, I think you can do better and AI does better, right?
Yeah.
But that, I would say I've known about that as a tactic, but I haven't incorporated it into kind of my standard practice. And granted, what does it cost? It costs basically, it's only tokens. It's only, and to environmentalists, perhaps that's not zero, but meaning it's, to a human, it's another 2 weeks of work. To an AI, it's literally another 15 seconds. And if you can actually improve the output on the proportion of 2 more weeks of work for 10 more seconds, and the only thing that's keeping you from getting that better work output is having the instinct of Henry Kissinger to tell the AI you think it can do better. As Steve Jobs used to do, have you heard this? I read this in Isaacson's book. He would often say, when he had an audacious goal, he would often tell someone, he'd look them in the eye and he'd say, don't be afraid.
I now have like a lot of people sitting listening to the podcast just shouting us do better. So like that's where I'm gonna maybe we should end it there.
Well, hang on. There's one other thing that I want to call out just while we're rattling through rattling through kind of, there is maybe to just like to a hammer everything's a nail, maybe to a professor everything's a education problem. This became clear to me this week when, again, for the 1,000th time, somebody asked me in a session, I'm in a room of 400 people, and there's a 10-minute Q&A, and 5 minutes are devoted to what about cognitive offloading? And again, to the honest question asker, that is there are legitimate strategies for addressing that. My feeling is most of the time, that's a conclusion someone is leveling about why they're disengaging, not a question they're earnestly asking. And I think it's at the very least, it's a good kind of personal check. I mean, it's probably impossible that anybody listening to our show is in the one camp, but it is worthwhile for folks to realize, listeners to our show are probably the evangelist in their company. When people ask that question, you have to realize they actually aren't interested in the answer. They're telling you, or your approach will change. Maybe the way you engage with that person is going to change when you realize what's actually going on is not they need tactics. It's a different mindset. I'll leave it at that.
Amen. I think that is all for the show. So I guess we only really have one thing left to say, and that is
Bye-bye.
bye.